I should warn you, when Chris and I were doing the training before Christmas, we'd spent about two days doing it, okay? You've got 45 minutes. Brace yourselves, okay? We're going to take this at pace today. I'm also very conscious that what it says on the program, the SenseMaker method, is possibly the worst title of any talk going on here in the last few days. And I apologize, I was flying somewhere and it's just like, oh, yeah, blurb, rubbish. So, welcome. If you've gone online already and wondered who the hell I am, you may have Googled, had a look to see who's out there. There's a bunch of Tony Quinlans. So you may have come across this guy, who's a finance director of a large power company, which apparently had a really bad year last year, which makes me feel a little better, because I suspect his salary package is substantially better than mine. But on the other hand, I've got more hair. So I'm sticking with that one. Other Tony Quinlans you may have come across. Let's see. We have the surfer dude in Queensland, who seems to be living in the 80s as far as I can tell with his hair. Hair is not a big theme for me. I just happened to have noticed this morning. I'd just like to say that now. There's also, this one's real fun. This is the pundit, Premiership pundit Tony Quinlan, who on various forums was described as a complete wanker. I'll let you make your own judgments as we go through in the next 40 minutes, but that's what he was called. He's also, funnily enough, a photographer who called me about 8 years ago, one evening at home. I went, "You own TonyQuinlan.com?" I said, "Yes, I do, but I want it." Well, I think the premise of I got there first counts quite a lot right at this point. He said, "But I really wanted it for my photography." I said, "Well, I'm actually writing a book, so that's why I've got it." And tough. He said, "Yeah, have you looked? There's a guy out there who also shares the same name as us who calls himself a chief storyteller. What a twat." He hasn't got any Christmas cards from me recently, and he needn't hold his breath. So, those are them. I'm me. So my background is, I was reflecting on this with Shane just now. 30 years ago, I was an electronics and computer engineer to the degree of designing chips from the silicon up. Now this really dates me. SQL, Ada, all of that kind of rubbish. And arguments with my lecturers. Why do it that way? Is it better for the user? And the response was, you never need to worry about something like a user. But then back in those days, that was pretty much par for the course. After that, I went and worked for various people, getting out quite early of coding and programming because I was really bad at it. I did a couple of summers building radar systems for battleships. Thankfully, none of those actually went into production. I'd be quite worried if they had. I went into communications and stuff like that, so I started to understand people, and I became the translator for tech people into everything else. So I was at IBM for a number of years in their manufacturing site in Greenock. If you've ever, in those days, it built 3 million PCs a year for the European market, but not for anybody who worked there. So in '95, I turned up to find a workstation on my desk and went, "Very funny, lads, where's the PC?" And the response from within IBM was, "Why would you want one of those?" Different worlds, many, many years ago. So anyway, so that's where I've come from. For the last 15 years, I've been looking at narrative, I've been exploring it to help people understand culture, to help people understand what other people are doing. Okay? Today we're doing it at pace, like I said, so all of this stuff we are skipping. If you're interested in this, drop us a note afterwards or talk to either myself or my colleague Anna. The other thing I need to ask you to do is raise your hand if I start going too quickly. I'm really bad at this. I get passionate, I start speeding up, not everybody can keep up, and I start talking bollocks and too much jargon. If that starts to happen, raise your hand and tell me to slow down and stop. I'm not offended by that. I'll also apologize now. I'm probably at some point going to swear. I know I already have talking about the other Tony Quinlans, but I may accidentally swear as I go through. Not intentional, I just tend to. My kids tell me off for it. You know you're doing badly when teenagers are telling you off for bad language. One of the things we're not going to really cover today, because I don't think you need to, I know more about this than anybody ever needs to, is Bangladeshi latrines. SenseMaker is a tool that we use to understand what's going on with people to come up with better solutions for big problems. To help understand what's going on with human beings. Bangladeshi latrines is one of the applications we put it to use with. In the last couple of years, we've done it with innovation in missile defense companies. We're actually running a piece right now around changing culture around agile programming in a global telecoms company, and I can't tell you much more than that. We did it last year. For those of you who are in the customer field and customer insight, may have come across NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is mentioned down there. We ran a big project on that last year, which completely messed with the heads of the market research team because the stuff that came back was so not what they thought it was. But it's completely changed the way people are approaching products and services that they're delivering. So this we could cover, we're not going to. However, I am going to give you just a very short, an insight, a little snippet into this world, okay, at pace. If you've got paper and pen or something to scribble on in front of you, that'll be really helpful in just a second, okay? Because I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to give you an experience to start with. I'll talk you through some of the theory. I'll talk you through some of the applications. So, if you can, what we're doing here is collecting users' voice and experiences. However, we're not interpreting it. We're never interpreting it. We're asking them to tell us what it means so that we can actually look at what the opportunity and the potential actually is that may not be what we're expecting, and it usually confounds expectations regularly. For a lot of these things, we're then using narrative to monitor people's responses, to get proper feedback and use that as monitoring. And I'll give you some practical examples as we go through. So, I'm about to show you two triangles. What I'd ask is copy them down for me, okay? They do not have to be neat, perfect triangles, okay? I have colleagues who are determined to make sure their triangles are equilateral at every opportunity. Scribble it, and scribble the language around it. What I want you to do is just to copy down those two triangles. So, I recognize this is not relevant to you, but I'm going to explain why you need these right now. So, the lesson in this story applies to the past, present, future. Just make a note of that, okay? A triangle with three corners, past, present, future. The lesson in the story applies to. And the second one, in the story, you'll be sharing a story in a second. You may not out loud, but you'll be thinking of one. What sort of justice is in your story? Revenge, deterrence, reconciliation. So just make a note of these for me, because I'm going to ask you to use these for an exercise in about 30 seconds. It's really simple, really straightforward. And if English is not your first language, use whatever is, okay? We don't stress about these things. We're collecting all the time in multiple languages. So Ethiopia right now, we have a project running in four languages. Afari, Amharic, Somali, and I can never remember what the fourth one is. But all of these are easy to use in multiple languages. So if you've scribbled those down, I'm going to jump to the next piece. So if you've got those two triangles, I'm going to show you three pictures. Make a note of, just look at the pictures, which one strikes you? Just choose the one. It's a gut feel. It's not a big thinking exercise. What thought, what story or fragment, or just what brings to mind from that picture? Okay? Make a quick note of it. You don't need to write War and Peace. Some people do. The record so far is a 3-page story. Okay? You don't have time to write that, and frankly, I'm never going to read it, so I wouldn't worry. Just think about what it means, and then thinking of that thought or that story that's come to mind from the picture, put a mark somewhere inside each of those two triangles for how you see that story. Okay? Is that clear? Like I said, I'm going at pace, so my apologies if I'm going too fast. Right, are you ready for the three pictures? I'm taking silence as assent at this point. Either that, if I start to hear snoring, I'll start to be concerned and I'll shout louder. But for now, I'll just take silence as assent. So, three pictures. 1, 2, 3. Pick the picture that strikes you. Make a note of what it brings to mind. And then with that thought in mind, put a mark on each of the two triangles. So don't overthink this. This is a gut instinct choice. Pick the one that strikes you, make a note of the story or thought it brings to mind, put a mark on the triangles. Okay. For those of you sitting there wondering, what the hell has this got relevance to anything we're doing? You're quite right, none. Okay? This is the first project I ever ran when I was looking at culture in Pakistan. And so in Pakistan, we showed a bunch of 8 pictures to young people and said, pick a picture, tell us a story, and put marks on those triangles. Because that way we could learn something about what was underlying, what was their disposition, what was their attitude. Not in answer to direct questions, which never get you the truth, but much deeper than that. So, quick question. Anybody choose that one? Quick show of hands. Excellent, thank you. This one was an interesting one. When we were in Pakistan, most of those pictures are quite ambiguous, and we just wanted to get whatever was going on. This one we chose because we were working with the British Council, who said, when you go to Pakistan, you're going to have to be really careful because they hate the UK. Not quite as much as they hate the US, but it's 92% to 89%. It's pretty marginal. So we said, okay, well, why do they hate the UK? And I guess like most Brits, you tend to think at some point we've gone into most countries and done something incredibly stupid and cruel and unpleasant to the population. So their assessment was, well, it's because of the Raj and the British Empire and that whole colonial history. Okay, let's test it. So this was a picture we did deliberately. It's not ambiguous. We took it from lesson plans the British Council were putting into schools to say there were some benefits to the British Empire to try and counteract the problem. So we took this picture and said, okay, if the British Empire and the colonial history and the Raj and all that stuff, understandably so, if that is the problem, we're going to get some belter stories coming back in response to this picture from young people in Pakistan. We did this about 10 days. We got 200 stories. 2 of them had venues, dates, mutinies, massacres, a whole load of material. They were both written by young 18-year-old men in Karachi classrooms, I suspect who had textbooks to hand because the level of detail was impressive. However, the other 198 stories were all variations on one theme. Wow, it would be cool to ride an elephant. When we went back to the British Council and said, this is what we're getting in response, they're going, they're misinterpreting the picture. Yeah, no, they're not. No. They're interpreting the picture exactly as they see it. But your assumption of how they're going to perceive it seems to be wildly wrong. But this is in the lesson pack of when this is the age group we're sending them material to counteract the problem. Well, the problem doesn't seem to exist until after your pack's gone in. I want to do a whole load more research before I make a conclusion, but one of my indications is, are you sending a pack in? And they're all going, this is really interesting. Let's look on the internet as well. Bastards. Is your solution creating the problem? Are you completely misinterpreting it? So, this is one of the examples from Pakistan. Anybody choose that picture? Excellent. Okay, here's where I put a little bit of risk on the line, especially for Chris. Okay, 50 quid to anybody who has got a story similar to the one I'm about to show you. Okay, I'm going to ask for your honesty at this point. So, young man again in Pakistan said this story. These 2 kids are playing with each other the way my government is playing with the Taliban. And the sooner we have proper Islamic law, the better. He went on for 2 pages. It was pretty impressive stuff. Again, what we're doing here is we're looking at the culture. We're just trying to trigger stuff that's relevant to the topic. Okay? We're looking for people's experiences around things. Anyone go for that picture? Brilliant. Most popular picture in Pakistan. We thought it was going to be all about Western decadence. We thought that people in Pakistan would be like, "Pfft." And to a degree, we were right. 20% came out with this, with things relevant to that. I love this. She's in jeans and t-shirt. How do you know? It's a head and shoulders shot. People have so much going on behind the scenes of their stories. One of the things when you collect stories is they tell you this piece here. There's a whole load more going on back here, which is relevant and you need to know. but they only ever tell you this piece. And if all you've got is their verbatims or the stories they're telling in response to your direct question, you're missing most of what you need. 30% were, this is anti-Islamic, this is haram, this is bad for the body. Okay, I love this. One of the things about this as well is they're not neat stories, they're not clear, they're not well spelled. It's messy data coming in. I get what I think they mean by the result of bad gathering or frustration. But actually, does it make sense? Not quite, but human sense-making works really well for this. But 50% of the stories in response to this were aspirational, which we really hadn't expected. Of the aspirational ones, my favorite is this. Now, I've shown you some of the stories we collected in Pakistan. However, the stories are not the point. Because one of the problems with all of these is we're reading the story and we're interpreting from that. It's not how you need to do it. So I did this back end of last year. We've done it in a number of places around the world now. But the back end of 2013 it was, in fact, we were in Libya. And in Libya, I collected one story that's that. Does anybody read Arabic in the room? Excellent. You have a far better idea what that may or may not say than I do. I have no clue. But I don't need to know what it says. Because the guy in question here had the same triangle that you guys were working with just now. And so he told a story and he said, okay, my story sits there. One story tells me next to nothing. But as other people tell more stories, I start to build up a pattern that allows me to look at what's really going on. What do people really want? What's underlying the situation we're looking at? So, just a quick look at that. What's the dominant form of justice? Just from looking at that pattern of dots. Revenge. Revenge is really big. The other thing with this is, one of the questions I asked, how do you feel about your story? Do you feel good about it? Do you feel bad about it? And then I color-coded them. It's a clunky visualization, I'll grant you. But green stories, therefore, are ones that we like. Red stories are ones that we don't like. So it's bad enough that revenge dominates here. What's really bad news is, we really like it. We're good with this. Okay? Deterrence, stopping people doing bad or stupid things. There's a lot of red down here. We don't like intervening. Believe it or not, when we looked at some of these, there were stories of, I was in a big queue in the bakery. One little guy came in and robbed the shop, and nobody stepped up. Nobody got in the way to stop it, because deterrence is just not, we don't do that. No, forget it, not playing. Now, it's one of these things that there are certain values we think everybody shares, or at least we have the same understanding of what it is from the other people. And suddenly we're in a different ballgame when you start looking really below what's on the surface. That's what we're looking at here. But one of the things about this is, remember, each one of these dots is a different story. If I want to intervene, if I want to change things in here, or I want to develop a new service to try and stimulate maybe more down here, I can go in there very simply and I can look. So that was 1,900 stories we collected in the space of about 2 weeks. If I need something here, if this is what I want more of, I go in and I bring up the stories. On this occasion, there's 170 in there. And that helps me to design what I do next. That's what we give to people who are designing programs, interventions, to come up with this. So in the telecoms company, in the mobile world last year, we went and gathered material from customers that we started off with the standard NPS question, if you've ever come across it. You'll have come across it, I'm sure, without maybe realizing it was NPS. NPS is where they say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this to a member of your family or a friend? 0 to 10, dead simple. There's a big Harvard Business Review article that says, this is the one question you need to ask to understand what's going on and how good your product is. And do you know what? It's bollocks. Sorry. Because people will know what answer you want. People know you're looking for 10s. So therefore, as human beings, our inclination is to go towards 10 or to game it sometimes if we're really pissed off. So people will give you that. We did the project in India last year. We had 80% of people said, 9 and 10, I would always recommend this company to my friends. And then when we looked at it, and we looked at it using things like the triangles, 15% of the people who said, 9 and 10, I'd always recommend this, also said, I would never fucking recommend this company. Market research people sat there and went, but how do they, what? They're saying they'd really recommend us. We've been banking on this for the last 5 years. It's our main metric. Yeah, but 15% of the people who say you're brilliant also say you're rubbish. Well, which is true? I said, well, I know what my money's on. Because you want to give a good answer to people. You know, I went to a wedding recently. TripAdvisor, the people I stayed at the B&B, said, you know, please go on to TripAdvisor, recommend us. They were lovely people. If I'm honest, it was a 3. What did I give them? A 4. Because you don't want to upset people. You know what people are looking for. You know, if you look at customer satisfaction, it's usually in the 70–80% range, unless you're doing a really bad job. Okay. The same goes for employee engagement when I used to run that, because it's generic. It's also across the board. How do you feel on average in your organization? Do you know what? On average doesn't help. What helps is specific instances. So some of the stuff we're doing with this, the reason I use SenseMaker, and I've been using it for about 6 years, so although these days I work for Cognitive Edge, I used to be one of their customers until very recently. And I've been using it on and off for the last 5–6 years. The reason I like it is it gets into specifics and actuality. It addresses what I call the Starbucks problem. I suspect this is apocryphal, but the story used to be that Starbucks used to go out to people and say, how do you like your coffee? And everyone goes, we like our coffee black. And they'd look at their sales figures and go, no, doesn't tally. But people believe they like their coffee black. So instead they started going, tell me about the last coffee you had. Oh, now that one was a latte. And suddenly the figures start to match. If you ask people for opinion, it won't necessarily match the reality. It's not because they're lying, it's not because they're deliberately deceiving you. Genuinely believe it. I like to think I'm a good father. On the other hand, if I were to tell you stories of how I interact with my 2 daughters, particularly at the moment as they hit their teenage years, the evidence starts to look slightly less glowing as I like to think it does. We do this all the time as human beings. And we do it whenever we talk to anybody, where we go and collect material from them. So increasingly now I'm using apps to do this. As has been pointed out by a couple of colleagues, they're slightly clunky. They could do with a little bit of honing and working up, but they are deeply effective. I'm using them at the moment in Rwanda. I went out, I had a team of 6 young women who got handed an iPad at 4 o'clock in the afternoon that they'd never seen before. They'd never used iPads with the app on it. Within 2 hours, they were collecting the most phenomenal stories from young girls in schools in rural situations, which is actually changing everything about the health service, the education service, and how they're being treated. They're also using it to report abuse problems. The stuff that's coming out is absolutely stunning. It is simple and straightforward, and yeah, it's not fancy. It's a bit clunky, but it's effective. Increasingly, we're getting people to collect stories and keep a diary. So in health service and hospitals, they're using it for people as they go through the process of going through as a patient, just to regularly collect a story. And of course, if you've got this, you can do audio and you can take images of stuff. So that becomes really interesting. You're allowing people to report as they go through the whole time. Lots of qual material that you can use, but always, we call it signified into things like triads. There's a bunch of other ways we do it, but you build a framework that allows them to add meaning to it in the ways we need to understand. You're not relying on understanding their story, because that will always lead you down the wrong track. And then you can separate out patterns from different kinds of users or different issues they're looking at. That's always a fun one. You know, on one topic, they may lean one way. On another topic or another usage, they may lean a completely different way. But we tend to look at them as being vanilla. They act the same whenever we ask them the question. No. They'll act differently depending on what situation they're in. So, a lot of the time what we're doing is we're trying to get the nuggets, the granular stuff. What's it like to be in your shoes on a day-to-day basis? Collecting those stories all the time. And we need to look beyond what we think is going to be there. Okay. Yeah. So, we know that the rules should be applied, but there may be certain circumstances when it's different. If all we're doing is looking at this piece of the picture, we miss the important context. The same goes whenever we're dealing with customers, users, employees, everybody. A moment is a moment. IBM famously, many years ago, when I was looking after communications there, we had an employee engagement survey, as everybody does. I look back on it and I weep. And I'd like to apologize to everybody who ever filled one out in IBM while I was there. But on one occasion, I came with the numbers coming back from one department, and they'd absolutely tanked. And so people go, oh, there's a problem in the department, let's go down and fix it. Big teamwork workshops, stuff like that. I went down and talked to one of the guys and says, what happened? And he went, boss, we're on the early shift, so we get in at 6, 8 o'clock, we get a breakfast break. We went to the canteen, we come back. Boss had decided we were taking too long. So he banned cereal. Because you've got to actually get the cereal, put it in the bowl, add milk, add sugar, sit down, eat it. So as of now, we have bacon sandwiches, or that's it. That's the only option at breakfast. And so he announced this at the meeting, we all went back, and you'd sent us a note saying, would you like to tell us how you feel? We did. It was a moment. I said, so where are we at now? You know, you've got a team workshop, all the rest of it. What's going on? He goes, well, it took him 3 days to realize he had been what was officially known as a dickhead. So, cereals are back on the menu, everything's fine. And this workshop, it's 2 days off work, it'll do. Yeah. The context, the moments matter. So we're always collecting those. And I won't go into too much the science behind some of the stuff. We look at the Cynefin framework. Chris will be dealing with the Cynefin later. I'm not going to go into detail with it here, other than some of you may have come across it. It is, for me, one of the most useful tools. I came across it in 2005. It enlightened a huge amount of what I do. Some things are simple, require straightforward responses and process. Some things are complicated, require big brains, analysis, research, but they still repeat. They are ordered. They are predictable. Some things are chaotic, when frankly, the first thing you've got to do is act to create some stability. I'm setting you up for this, Chris. You're going to have to deliver a whole load more this afternoon. Seriously, it will be really interesting. For me, if you're dealing with people and human beings, you're in a complex world. Our attitudes shift depending on the context we're in, what we're doing at that time. We know this from neuroscience. And when we're dealing with SenseMaker, that's what we're building up here. We need to understand the patterns people behave in and the ways they see the world. And I'm sure Chris will deal with disorder this afternoon. I wanted to share one key thing with this. People I've come across a lot. They get stories, they collect material, and they say, we can read it, we can understand what's going on. I want to tell you, you can't. It's one of the problems I find with a lot of the sentiment analysis stuff. People assume that the meaning is in the content of the words you're looking at. It's rarely the case. Let me give you some specific examples. So, an organization I was working at recently, someone told a story and said, we were having this big meeting about the budget. And this guy came in, interrupted, and tried to lay down the law, but we knew he was a complete red shirt, so we ignored him. What does red shirt mean to you? Thank you. Yeah. So funnily enough, it was a company where this is the metaphor they were using. So, everybody know who this guy is?
Security guy is gonna die.
He's gonna die. Okay. He's the guy, if you are in a red shirt and you are beaming down to the planet, you have a one-way ticket. Okay. You are the energy saver. You are the one they're not going to have to bother coming back up because you're going to be in pieces. You're the one the alien gets every time. But if you don't know that metaphor, you interpret red shirt completely differently. So in some places, some countries, don't have Star Trek. Strange that. Indonesia is quite a strong one, as I discovered about 2 weeks ago. Okay. Red shirt to them is a political statement. Okay. To some of my colleagues, it means you're a Manchester United fan, which says an awful lot about you anyway. But if you understand, if you share this metaphor, red shirt is an assessment of life expectancy. Okay. Now, the next two slides are somewhat superfluous, but my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, has cottoned onto this fact, and she, like me, is a bit of a geek, so she started sending me pictures from Star Trek, just because she thinks I now use the red shirt metaphor a lot. But if you don't get that metaphor and you apply it in the wrong environment, the message you send will be spectacularly wrong. So there's a healthcare company in the States. Now imagine you live in the Star Trek world and your health company is saying that. The metaphors people use in stories, and as human beings, we use metaphor all the time. They are not understandable if you come from outside that field. The Bangladeshi latrines, we had a story that said this was a real leg break problem. I was working with some Dutch colleagues who said, leg break problem, is it, we've got to go to the hospital? Or is it thugs and gangs? You know, you go in and you break legs to get the problem? And I went, no, you have to understand, in Bangladesh, they're a civilized country, therefore they play cricket. So therefore a leg break is a really tricky problem, which sadly the England team are discovering they don't know how to deal with those problems at all currently down under. So, meaning is not in the content, metaphor is one element of that. Another element, remember this one? Remember this picture? Remember that story? So, occasionally I put this up when I'm feeling somewhat mischievous at defense conferences or government conferences, and people go, do we have that guy's details? Do we know where he is? Can we find him? Because you read that and you think, this guy's being radicalized somewhat. He's leaning towards the jihadi world. However, the meaning is not in the content. I had him answering questions. I had him putting dots on triangles. One of the questions I said was, how do you feel about this? Do you feel really angry? Do you feel really positive? Do you feel depressed, sad, whatever it might be? Who should hear this story? The whole world should hear it? My leaders, my country, my friends? What? Now, if this is how he feels, I'm expecting a strong emotion, right? He goes, not bothered. Really? You say this and you're not bothered about it? If this is how he feels, I think people need to hear this. This is an important thing. Who should hear this? My friends. Okay, I'm not quite sure where you are. What title do you give this story? Joke. He's being sarcastic. People are sarcastic. You and I are sarcastic all the time, but of course the people we interview, users whose response we're looking for, they're never sarcastic. Surely they're telling us the truth straight the whole time. We want to allow people to be human in responding, but then to actually let us see what's in there. So sarcasm always gets missed. And then there's one final one, which is the evolution of language, which in our house is really powerful. Different generations in my house understand the same phrase different ways. Okay? There's a single phrase which works really well, which is called, Dad's mowing the lawn. Okay? When I was growing up, if I came down Saturday morning, my brother was watching Swap Shop probably at the time, and said, Dad's mowing the lawn. That was code. And that code said, he's got a problem from work that's really doing his head in. And one of the ways my dad would start to resolve those things was by walking up and down the garden in rigid straight lines, almost as a meditative practice, thinking it through. Dad's mowing the lawn was code for, he has a problem he's thinking through. Leave him in peace. If he started doing sideways as well afterwards, you knew it was a real humdinger of a problem. Okay. To my daughters, if one of them comes down Saturday morning and it's Dad's mowing the lawn, whole different code. Okay. That says, give him 15 minutes, make a cup of tea, and take it out to him, but be prepared to duck. Okay. Because I have a garden on a slope like this, which I think makes a fantastic nature reserve. And every once in a while, my wife goes, the grass needs cutting. And it's not a good moment in our house. Okay. The last time I did it back in October, I came back in, my wife said, I love the way you swear at the mower. Oh, you think it's the mower I'm swearing at? Okay. So again, language evolves. all the time. If you're relying on it, if you're relying on interpreting the meaning out of that content, you will miss it. For anyone who's got kids, tell me what "that is so sick" means this week, because that shifts on such a regular basis, I get whiplash. So relying on that isn't going to do it for you. It's also, we've seen this in a few places, people interpret from our own perspective. The patterns we're bringing, the things we're expecting to see, matter hugely. This is a project we did last year. I took stories from people we collected, stories from young girls in Ethiopia. We said, in your story, is the girl independent, obedient, vulnerable, balance of them all? And you can see where the data came back. So we've got one down here. The rest, those are roughly spread here, a couple there. Then I gave them to experts in gender politics and gender issues for the UN and said, you read those stories, you put them on the triangle. Not a lot of correlation. Huge misinterpretation. Now, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that if you were then, these guys were to go back to the girls and say, we've got to look after vulnerable girls, the girls in Ethiopia will go, yes, we should, but why are you looking at me? And we do that all the time. I think about it when I did user work before. We look at what you're doing. No, what you need to do is this. Why are you having a problem with that? You just need to do that. Well, hang on, that's not what I was trying to do. I was trying to do this instead. This is what matters to me, not that. We interpret too much. This is one of the things we're using to get past that for NGOs and all sorts of others. I said people can gift if they can see what answer you're looking for. I'm not going to ask you to give me an answer to that because, frankly, I'm scared of what answer I might get. But you can see, if I were to put this up, you know what answer I'm looking for, right? So you might choose to give it to me, or you might choose to disrupt. But either way, you know the hypothesis, and that will sway your answer. So what we do instead is things like this. Okay? It's all okay. It's all balanced. It's all positive. But actually, if it sways in one direction over another, I'll get information. I used this once in, let's call it a high street bank. Let's call it a high street banking company. And for those of you who are good with initials, you may have a clue. And we used it to get feedback on speakers. Now, I wasn't there, I didn't see them, but when I was looking at the data that came back, and I rang my colleague and I said, speaker number 6, he was shite, wasn't he? And he went, shocking. He's a vice president, I've got to go give him feedback on just how poor he was. He said, but you weren't there, how do you know? I said, because everyone's gone, he gave us relevant information. That's it. And apparently my colleague sat down with this bloke and said, right, we need to do your feedback. And he said he was terrified because this guy was a real bear and had the power of firing and sacking on the spot. And he put this triangle down, loads of dots up here, almost nothing here. And the guy went, oh, good. So I was giving him lots of information. Brilliant. Next year, would you be willing to come and help me work on the presentation so it's maybe a little bit clearer on the message? My colleague's going, yeah, let's ignore the last 6 weeks of friggin' emails that I've been sending you saying, can I see your presentation? Can I come and help you? He went, yeah. Are there any courses I could go on? The guy made it up for himself. When you do it like this, it's so much easier. And it's not offensive because you're not saying, what are you crap at? And the same goes out in the field with all of this stuff. What actually influences things? Not what's driving it, not what's the right answer. What influences what's going on? And I'll skip this one because I want to show you one final one, which shows you just how easy sometimes when you've got this material, it is to come up with solutions. I'll skip that one as well. Actually, no, I won't. That's a good one. So this was one I worked with last year. No, 3 years ago. Time flies. How are people making decisions? So they were all, strategic here was code for some big guy stood up and said, this is what we're doing. But they were looking at what was going on. This was actually for an NGO. But this is one of the stories that was sitting down here. Suddenly, you look at the pattern, you say, there's a big issue here, look, what do we go do about it? Then you look at the stories. Then you look at the material, and suddenly you get insight of what to do next. So with these guys, it was really simple. You know, they're complaining about getting too little, we need more brown bag lunches again. They'd spent the last year cutting them back because they figured it was easy. You always also get some absolute cracking stories with distinct degree of humor. So this was an aid organization deciding where it was going to go next. There was a competition actually to guess who had dropped the most, in their words, F-bombs, as in who had sworn the most in their stories. So, what we do as SenseMaker, we collect stories. We collect people's experiences because they will be more reflective of what's really going on, and we allow the audience to attach meaning to it. So we might collect photographs, we might collect audio, we might collect text. But we allow them to tell us what it means into a framework that allows us to do effectively quant analysis. Okay, whenever it's in this corner of this triangle, whenever the issue is the service they get from the company, what they want to see is the call center taking ownership of the problem, not having the right answer. That's a real example from one of last year's projects. So you start to see how it plays differently. We look at the patterns that emerge. We're not looking for, is it going to be in this corner or this corner? We'll play with this. European Commission last year, the EU Digit, for those of you who have worked with them, they're the division that provides IT services to the rest of the European Commission. Yeah, you can just imagine how that one went. Yeah. We collected about 500 user stories from people out there, and then we worked with the teams for them to decide for themselves what the patterns meant and what they did next. In the space of a one-day workshop, they came up with about 20 different projects, some of which were going against the issues that they'd been staring at for the last 2 years and thinking, what the hell do we do about this? The Director General came up and said, I've been looking at the Microsoft problem for the last couple of years. Now, if you're like me, I'm thinking, which one? There's so many options. He said, I've had 3 research teams for the last 6 months and we've made no progress. On the back of actually seeing the users' stories about this, I'm running 3 experimental projects in the next 2 months, which will get us further to a solution and will help us understand what the real issue is here. And that'll come back into what Chris will be talking about later in terms of Cynefin. It's not going for a research approach when you've got to start acting. And at the end of the day, I'm always interested in what do we do next? I do this research, I gather stuff, I'm always fascinated, but what matters to me is what happens next. So I've got a couple of minutes, and so I want to give you one final example. Liverpool Museum. Again, it's not what you do, but you'll understand this. So kids go to Liverpool museums, and they go on a school trip. Everyone goes in, they go back to the classroom, and then they're asked to tell a story. What's the story either that you would tell your best mate to persuade them to come down to the museum on Saturday instead of going to the shops or to the footy? Personally, I think that's a little bit optimistic in Liverpool, but never mind. Or what's the story you tell your parents so that you never ever get sent on a trip to that horrible museum ever again? Okay. And then please put your story somewhere on these. So I'm going to focus on the top one. One of their goals is we treat our visitors at the age-appropriate level. Okay. So that's what they're after. Now, what you're looking for is something right in the middle here. And that red line there is the mean. As long as it's within this green, they're happy. But they've got to keep an eye on it. Now, the problem here is that mean has suddenly shifted to the right. So in terms of understanding, kids are saying the staff are being too childlike. Now, when I think back to my days at IBM and employee engagement surveys, that's usually when you send in all-staff emails to everybody saying, please grow up a bit. And then you get all the stick you deserve for sending a stupid email like that. Yeah, system-wide problem is what you tend to be looking at. But when you've got the narrative, you play it differently. So at this point, I can go, okay, stories in the last 48 hours that have come in, I've color-coded red, and there's a bunch that have suddenly skewed it down this way. So there's clearly an issue there. So let's look at the material. There are 5 of the titles. Titles are brilliant. When people put titles on their stories, there's a huge amount of meaning. And usually, it's very rarely using words that are in the story, which again comes into that content meaning thing. But at this point, I can then go, I need to look at the actual story. What's really happened there? So if I pull up one of the examples, and this is a real one, you can tell from the way it's written and the spelling and everything else. I love the last three words. It's the chorus in our house. But at this point, what I do next is much more straightforward. At one point, I had a measure that said, we're dealing with people too childlike and pathetic. But now I've got real material to work on. And funnily enough, all 5 of those stories were all about Mr. Smith and all about a similar issue. Now, at that point, it's easy. You have a quiet word with Mr. Smith. What's happening? Is it, they keep breaking whenever you give them out. Is it you haven't got enough models? Is it something else? But you've now got context to be able to intervene better from collecting data this different way, based on real experience and people's opinions, not interpreting for them. Okay. I'm going to skip over this one. I'm going to stop here because I've just gone 2 minutes over. And sadly, I have to say that check-in for my flight this afternoon opened about 10 minutes ago. So I'm not around for the rest of the day. However, there is a more sociable, slower speaking, more understandable, knowledgeable expert in the room, who's my colleague Anna. Stood up. So if you want to know more about this, if you've got questions to ask, she's the one to nail from now on. Okay? She's much more friendly and sociable than I am. I can be a horrible individual and grumpy, as she will no doubt tell you. Anna Hanchar. So, she'll be around the rest of the day. Look for her. She didn't know I was using that photograph, I'm sorry. Other than that, I will leave in peace. Questions, thoughts, and then we need to break, I guess.
So, folks, any questions?
What is it? Exaptation?
Exaptation.
Yeah, that's Scrabble.
Absolutely. So exaptation is it's part of evolution, but it's a bit that's starting to shifting. So in the past, we used to think we adapt to improve the use of something all the way through. Exaptation says something's evolved for this use, and then actually going, oh, and I'm going to use it over here. So it's stealing it and using it for a completely different purpose. So for instance, in our brains, in primates, the piece of the brain that evolved to handle seeds, picking seeds out of flowers and things, became brilliant for grammar. Now, there's no way it evolved for grammar. It evolved for one method that we then use over here. And exaptation is, if you're being innovative, it's one of the most effective things to do. Apple are brilliant at it. So, I think back to IBM days. I can remember seeing people testing laptops, and they developed the sensor in laptops that it would detect if it's falling, if the laptop had dropped off the edge of the desk, and then lift the stylus off, lift the heads off the hard drive. Okay. Apple took that and went, well, hang on, if I put that in a phone, it detects orientation. So exaptation is brilliant for that. What that slide was looking at, there we go, quickly, is sometimes what we've done is collected stories. For instance, over here we collected stories, this was in Philips a few years ago, stories from customers and users. And this one was actually about gardens. So it was, what do you like about your garden? Tell me a story about your garden. And they put it into triangles and things. At the same time, they had the technology teams putting the technologies they were working on and they were aware of, and products and all of that kind of thing, into the same framework, same triangle. And then you mash the two together. And so what you end up with is clusters that are mixed or not mixed. So, okay, we've got a bunch of things here that our customers agree that this is an issue for them. That we've got a bunch of customers there, but we've got no technology to address it. Okay, do we understand it right? Are we going in the wrong direction? Up here, loads of technologies, but no customer stories. Maybe we should be cutting back on the investment there. On the other hand, those other three, now, customer stories and technologies coinciding, emerging together. And at that point, actually, they started to develop brand new markets and brand new products. Because they'd realized the reason for the whole purpose of this piece was the lighting division of Philips. I wasn't involved in it, but as I understand it, recognized that garden lighting was a potential big new market, somewhat beyond their current frame of it, which is put a spotlight out there. Yeah, let's get more creative than that. And exaptation is exactly that. So exaptation is let's take what we know, so the bits of technology here, and adapt it for things. Exapt it, take it somewhere else. Sorry, long answer, short question.
Good time for one or two more. Going. So,
We're good.
Tony, thank you very much.
Thank you.